Okay, hi guys. So today you are acting as a board of executives from HBO for our movie pitch. This is Devil on the Peninsula by JensenM and I. And in the 1850s foggy streets of San Francisco, we follow pharmacist R.C. Chambers as he uncovers a murder plot and battles addiction and psychosis.
All right, let's get a look at what the setting of our story will be. And so it's based in 1850 San Francisco. This is like peak gold rush. So let's look at some illustrations that Will made. Right here we have a street view of R.C. Chambers Pharmacy right there on the corner. And then here's an inside perspective view of what we imagine it to look like. And then we have what we imagine the inside of his apartment to look like.
Next up, we have the Midnight Lotus, which is the opium den where RC goes from time to time to relieve stress and get his mind off of the work and the string of murders that is happening around the city. We also have another AI-generated image of RC's pharmacy, kind of like a more realistic.
And then we have our first character, R.C. Chambers, who is our protagonist and antagonist. He came to San Francisco in the 1850s during the gold rush, but was unable to strike gold. So he set up a pharmacy with his assistant, Miss Wu. He's a middle-aged man. He battles psychosis, and he spends a lot of time at the opium den.
Right, and then his partner in crime is Miss Wu. Miss Wu is RC's. They work together at that pharmacy together, and she's kind of seen as RC's like middle-aged, like motherly figure, and RC goes to Miss Wu to like rely on her, and like it's like their only friend. And RC and Miss Wu, they don't really share a lot of like outside like connections, so Miss Wu isn't really super invested in the murders that's happening around the city.
Next we have the Bourne family. They're from Germany and they are RC's neighbors. They live like next door in the same building. And Mr. Bourne, the father, is actually the head of the local newspaper at the time. So he's kind of like the main informant for RC about like all the murders going on and just like news and the potential uprising of a serial killer.
Alright, next up we have Viper, who is the bouncer of the Midnight Lotus, who is always kind of like putting weird thoughts into RC's head, and whenever they have like slight interactions, he's always questioning RC about like the murders and like who the real killer could be, and always throwing RC off his game whenever they have the small interactions.
Alright, so Act 1 begins with introduction to kind of just like RC's day-to-day life living in 1850 San Francisco. You kind of get a feel of the rush and how like just everything's going. And the first inciting incident in the story is when RC is on his way to work at the pharmacy and he stumbles across a crime scene. This crime scene is a victim of the potential serial killer, and that kind of like from there on out is stuck in his head, and he's just like always thinking about this potential like serial killer going around. And then so later that day he just kind of goes to work and just super stressed out, so he ends up at the Midnight Lotus later that night. He kind of is there to de-stress, and eventually he makes it home. And the next morning when he wakes up, he finds his apartment has been ransacked. It's very evident that somebody had broken in and messed around.
Leading into Act 2, RC's psychosis and his self-medication and his opium addiction is getting significantly worse, and he is starting to lose like a touch of like reality of like who he is as a person. And so as he starts going to the Midnight Lotus more and more frequently, he eventually gets kicked out as he's causing like a distraction to like the others around him, and it's causing him to like lose touch of himself, and then causing him to do some very mysterious things after.
Yeah. And then Act 3 you get if you choose to develop our film.
Alright. And then so we have
So we have our digital media projects.
So for mine, I made a light box of what I imagine like RC and the Bourne family's building to look like. Kind of followed like the Victorian style that San Francisco has.
And then I'm doing stacked wood art. I haven't finished mine yet, but it's kind of like a modern day look of San Francisco. But you can see how there's like blood dripping down and like portraying like an eerie vibe.
Yeah, and then for mine, I did the 3D stack with art, and I did another perspective of RC's house. Yeah, and then reflection, I think we did a really good job of like collaborating throughout the project. Developing it, we all got on a FaceTime and went like line by line to create the story.
I also think that we worked really well together because we're all in design class, so we could very like cohesively like talk about like the creative aspects of our story, not just the like actual writing part.
I think the only like issues we really ran into was that we all had like so many ideas. It was kind of hard to figure out like what we wanted to keep in the story and what we wanted to take out. Like some ideas just didn't work together, so it was kind of hard just to figure out what to put in the story.
Alright, thank you.
Audience, your HBO executives.
What does the name have in relation to the story?
RC or the devil.
The devil on the peninsula.
Well, since like the peninsula is like the like San Francisco and like the area that we live in, we just thought it would be like kind of like intriguing to have like I don't know, just give like a rough basis of like the location and also how like the devil being like who the killer is. Sure.
What audience are you trying to like target like for your movie?
Well, the genre is like psycho thriller, so I don't know, like people that are interested in that, I guess.
Felicia.
Do you have some lore on RC? Because like I know that he moved or like sounds like he emigrated to San Francisco, but is there a reason that he doesn't stay in contact with his family or a reason that he left?
We didn't develop too much of his backstory. I think during the time a lot of people came to San Francisco, and just because of how hard it wasn't easy to like communicate back or to like visit home.
There's no phones.
Yeah, no phones, no anything.
This is like kind of asking what Act 3 is about, but like, what does like the main character have in relation to like the murders? Because I feel like there's some type of connection between them.
Alright, so big twist is that RC Chambers is actually the murderer.
I knew it.
And like as his like and then as his like addictions and like he's losing sense of reality, in Act 3 he like sees like a body in his apartment and he's trying to figure out who it is, and then it all clicks in the end.
Yeah.
Katie.
What is it gonna be rated?
Probably
I think
hard.
our posters come on. Yeah.
And
What happens to Miss Wu throughout the story?
she never, since she's not really invested in the murders, she's just kind of just almost a side character, but just always like a helping hand to RC. But she does start to get worried about him as like it's very evident that he's starting to lose touch with himself.
So fun.
Does anyone like start to suspect him, or is there anyone? Is like there a risk that he's gonna get caught?
Yeah, we had that in like the third act where it becomes more like apparent to like his neighbors and like Miss Wu, and that's when like RC kind of starts to go more crazy, and like it kind of like he finally identifies himself like as he like realizes that he is like the devil, kind of like the murderer, and then that from there we hadn't like come with a complete conclusion how we wanted to end the story, because we wanted to keep it kind of like open-ended for the executives. If you guys want to change it.
I like to see Miss Wu be shocked at the end. You know, you develop her as being kind of close to RC, and then finally at the end she's so we are basically Mrs. Wu. If you could develop that.
Avani.
Do you think RC would turn himself in or try to hide it?
It's a good question.
To turn himself in.
I don't think so.
I think he's too crazy for that.
Tab.
Is there a reason that he commits these murders? Like, is there a trigger that enables him to go into this mode of psychosis where he doesn't realize that he's doing it, but there's like certain triggers that, or attributes maybe even that these murder victims have?
I think largely it's because of the like opium that he's doing, and it's kind of a cycle between like psychosis and then like being stressed at work and then like needing to de-stress at the end of the day. And so that kind of like sent him down this path. Felicia.
Is there any like societal conflicts that you think this story like tries to, I don't know, like
show through its like storyline and kind of gives you the plot?
Not really, because since it's so early on and the city's just becoming like more industrialized, because it's like just after the gold rush, it's not really like there's not a whole like societal like. I mean, there is the Midnight Lotus, but that's kind of like the only other besides the Midnight Lotus and the pharmacy and his apartment. But like, there's not really a whole.
Yeah, throughout the like 1830s and to 1850s in San Francisco, there was like a huge drug crisis, like even more than there is today with opium. So we kind of tried to touch on that as like a historical plot point.
That's a really good point. So, to what extent was research a part of your process in building this? Because the historical context is so important, and understanding the era historically would be really important to developing your story and resolving some of what you're talking about here. So, can you talk more about that?
Well, I didn't do as much of the information about like the opium like problem itself, but for like just like 1850 San Francisco, we had to like figure out like what was there, like where the city was, and like where we wanted to do our story. Cause like 1850 San Francisco was still like very small, and we kind of tried to figure out like when Gold Rush was, like what kind of people were coming into California, and we kind of tried to figure out like we just wanted to like fact check a lot of the things that we were doing.
And we also researched like a few like the like people who were like very wealthy in like San Francisco during this time, like Leland Stanford and
The Bournes, that was a real
Bournes.
family.
Yeah, the Bournes family. That was kind of like our main pivotal point for like figuring out like who like establishing like the wealth status.
That's a great idea. When you mentioned Leland Stanford, you almost are alluding to a real life devil on the peninsula. You know what I mean? Because he's one of the robber barons. And I was just curious, because of the title, would you be interested in expanding the scenes and the action to include like Northern California, because like there's up to Tahoe, kind of down the peninsula, like just expanding the scenes to encompass more of the Bay Area during this time period.
Yeah.
I mean, I can kind of see it as like becoming some sort of series, but like each like different film could follow maybe like a different like antagonist or like protagonist, I guess. But they're all kind of like a devil. Or, like,
It reminds. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
they just like have something bad going on. They're doing some messed up stuff, and the story follows them.
Have you seen Deadwood on HBO?
I have not.
I highly recommend you watch Deadwood
Is
because
that
this.
the new show?
No, it's an older series. It's 3 seasons, but it's based on a historical old western town. I think it was actually in the Dakotas, but similar kinds of setting and conflicts and characters. So definitely check that out. That was on HBO.
Katie?
I know that we find out that he's the murderer, but does he ever get like officially caught, or how does it end? Like, does it just like cut off what like he finds out he's the murderer and then it just like goes to black or something? Like, how does it end?
When we had it like we had like written like after he kind of like ended with like him
Like more.
officially like establishing that he was the murderer.
Yeah, we never really like ended it where it was like
It was kind of
somebody found out he was the killer. It was like the end point was like he realized he was the killer. So like we start off with him like we had an idea of him like looking into a mirror and like seeing him like be the actual killer, but we just kind of scratched that. Any other question?
So technical question. You used generative AI for some images. How many revisions of your prompts did you actually have to go through?
So
nice.
our RC Chambers, we wanted him to not have a beard.
We
We'd,
tried.
like ask the
We
AI
tried
to be
getting
like,
the beard away. Like
we'd say like use this picture but remove all facial hair, and it would say like, okay, here's an image with facial hair, and it would give us like 4 or like no facial hair. It would give us like 4 images, and they'd all have like super long beards. I don't know if it was just because like San Francisco at the time, like everyone had long beards, but it never like got the prompt.
What was your prompt for that?
Like middle-aged man, San Francisco, 1850s.
Yeah.
No beard.
Would
We
it
said no
always give
beard.
you that much of a beard?
Yeah.
every time.
So there was a lot of revision and going back in and tweaking.
So my question really is about what did you learn about creating the prompts to get the image that you were envisioning?
I think with a lot of trial and error, it was, a lot of like, okay, here's what we're envisioning in our heads. How do we translate this into something that like a computer model like that can develop? I think we learned it's a good tool to use, especially like in world building and like brainstorming, because it can kind of fill in a lot of the holes that you don't have yourself.
So education is always like, there's this question of using AI as a way of cheating, and this completely blows that away, saying this is a way of using it for brainstorming, and I applaud you for that, because this is really, really a good use of AI rather for a positive thing like you're doing now to help you understand your story and visualize your story.
Yeah, this was also
Probably the best one.
yeah, this is probably like one of the better ones we got.
And this we went through like 20 different images.
Yeah,
to try to
we
get.
found like 20 things.
Yeah, you used it as sort of paintbrush to represent your vision, so really effective use of that. All right, thank you, group. That story evoked a lot